The stack. Somewhere in America tonight, a refrigerator built in 1927 is still running. Same steel cabinet, same compressor. It hums in a garage almost 100 years after it left the factory in Schenectady, New York, while the refrigerator in your kitchen is engineered to quit in 11 to 14 years and reach a landfill before the decade is out. That is the first strange thing. Here are three more, and every one of them is on the record. The United States government once spent years testing a single metal in a laboratory, and then did something it has never done for any other solid material in history. It certified, in writing, that the metal kills more than 99.9% of dangerous bacteria on contact. That same metal appears to get better at the job the longer it sits and tarnishes. And your great-grandmother's kitchen was full of it, until, a generation or two ago, it was quietly engineered out of nearly everything you own. Not because it stopped working, because of one fact about the periodic table. The metal is copper. The ring of it, sitting on top of that 1927 refrigerator, can be back in your kitchen tonight for about the price of a cup of coffee. What it can honestly do for your food is one half of this story. The colder half is why someone decided, on a spreadsheet, that you were better off without it. This is Oracle Prime. Your great-grandmother's kitchen had 3 defenses against rot that yours was built without. And then there is the reason all 3 disappeared. They get stranger as we go. What the box actually is. Start with what a refrigerator really is, because it is not what the brochure says. It is not a pause button. It is a sealed, humid, air-circulating box, and almost everything inside it is biologically dead. Plastic and stainless steel, materials with no action against bacteria whatsoever. A microbe that lands on stainless steel sits there in comfort. It attaches, divides, and builds a slick protective film of its own making called a biofilm. Cold slows this down. Cold does not stop it. An entire class of bacteria, the psychrotrophs, evolved specifically to keep multiplying at refrigeration temperatures. Pseudomonas turning the cucumbers to slime. The gray bloom creeping across last night's rice. The faint, sour edge on milk that is technically still in date. And in clinical testing, researchers have left disease-causing bacteria on stainless steel and returned days, even weeks later, to find them still alive and still dividing, with no meaningful drop at all. The surface looked spotless the whole time. Worse, the box pushes cold air on a constant loop, so whatever colonizes one shelf rides that air to every other. The clean-looking refrigerator is a circulation system, and it circulates more than cold. Your great-grandmother's kitchen had no such loop, but it had something the box does not. 3 things, in fact, and the first is the one the government eventually put in writing. Defense 1. The surface that killed on contact. Long before anyone had seen a microbe, people on 3 separate continents noticed the same impossible thing. Food and water kept in copper refused to rot the way everything else did. They were right. Not one of them could say why. The evidence is older than writing itself. In the Caucasus Mountains, archaeologists have lifted copper alloy cauldrons from Bronze Age burials and found, dried inside them, the chemical residues of milk and other foods stored there thousands of years ago. In Egypt, the Edwin Smith Papyrus, written around 1600 BC, the oldest surviving surgical text in the world, lists a copper mineral solution among its treatments for infection. 3 peoples, no contact between them, the same conclusion arrived at independently and held for 40 centuries. The why did not arrive until 1893 in Zurich in the work of a Swiss botanist named Carl von Nägeli. Nägeli is a quietly tragic figure in the history of science. 2 decades earlier, A monk named Gregor Mendel had mailed him the experiments that would become the foundation of modern genetics. And Nageli read them, missed their significance completely, and advised the monk to work on something else. He died never knowing what had passed through his hands. But in 1893, studying algae in water, he caught something no one had measured. Water holding a trace of copper so faint the chemistry of his day could barely detect it, still killed the living cells suspended in it. The dose was almost nothing. The effect was nearly total. He named it from two Greek words, oligos, few, and dynamis, force. The oligodynamic effect, the work of a vanishingly small force. Here is the machinery Nageli could feel the edges of, but never see. When copper meets air and moisture, it sheds positively charged ions, copper atoms stripped of an electron, loose and reactive. A bacterium that settles onto that surface meets those ions, and they do not poison it gently. They punch through its cell membrane, flood inside, and set off a storm of reactive oxygen species, the same corrosive molecules your own immune cells use to kill invaders. The ions then seize the sulfur and nitrogen groups on the cell's proteins, jamming its enzymes, and they fragment its DNA. The organism does not get sick. It comes apart. And because this is closer to demolition than to medicine, bacteria struggle to evolve around it. Resistance to copper does exist. Some strains carry tolerance genes on plasmids, and that should be said plainly. But it is far rarer and far weaker than antibiotic resistance, because the thing being resisted is less a drug than a crowbar. This is not ancient folklore. On February 29, 2008, after years of laboratory testing, the United States Environmental Protection Agency registered 275 copper alloys as the first solid surface materials in American history permitted to carry a public health claim. That, kept clean, they kill more than 99.9% of 6 specific bacteria, among them MRSA and the dangerous E. coli strain 0157:H7, within 2 hours of contact. Not a coating sprayed on top that wears away. The metal itself, all the way through, even scratched. And here is the detail that sounds invented until you check it. Studies suggest a tarnished copper surface kills as fast or faster than a polished one because the oxidized layer carries more reactive surface area releasing ions. The patina is not decay. It is the metal showing its work. Sit with what that registration meant. Of every solid material humans have ever manufactured, every steel, every plastic, every ceramic, every silver-coated antimicrobial product on the market, copper and its alloys were the first the government allowed to say, on a label, that they kill bacteria. The brass doorknob in an old building was doing this the entire time. The bronze handrail, the copper coin worn smooth in 1,000 pockets, all of them quietly hostile to the microbes landing on them, for as long as anyone has been casting the metal. The kitchen simply used to be full of the stuff, and now it isn't. But read the certified claim closely, because it names its own limit. On contact. A surface protects only what physically touches it, the pan, the counter, the lid. The moment food sits in the air just above the metal, copper cannot reach it. So the old kitchens did something cleverer with the one substance that touches everything. Defense 3. The invisible halo. In the neonatal intensive care unit of the Hagia Sophia Children's Hospital in Athens, researchers replaced the door handles, the work surfaces, and the drawer tops with copper. Contamination on the copper itself fell by about 90%. That much was expected. What was not expected came next. The ordinary non-copper surfaces up to 50 centimeters away from the copper also came back roughly 70% cleaner than equivalent surfaces elsewhere in the ward. The metal was lowering the microbial burden of the space around it, not just what you touched, but the air and the surfaces near it. They named it the halo effect, a field of cleaner air radiating out from the source. 50 centimeters. Hold that distance against the inside of a crisper drawer, which is smaller than that in every dimension. A clean sheet of copper laid under the produce is not just a surface the food rests on. It may be a source, throwing a faint field across the whole compartment. The same effect the hospital measured, scaled down to the space where your strawberries live. The science was done on door handles. The principle does not care what room it is in. But a halo needs something to cast it. It exists only where there is enough copper present to throw the field. And in your kitchen, there is almost none left. The pans went to coated aluminum. The counters went to plastic and stone. The coils inside the walls of the fridge went to aluminum. The liners went to polymer. 3 defenses, each one documented, each one cheap, each one thrown away inside living memory. Which leaves the single question this entire video has been walking toward. Where did all the copper go? Defense 2. The water that cleaned itself. In the Ayurvedic tradition of northern India, physicians prescribed a practice called tamra jal, drinking water stored overnight in a pure copper vessel and taken at first light. It was not superstition, it was sanitation, and modern laboratory work has since backed it. Water left standing in a copper pot drops sharply in live bacteria within hours, as the oligodynamic effect works straight through the water. The pattern repeats everywhere copper met liquid. The Egyptians stored their liquids in copper and bronze. The Romans aged grapes and other foods in copper-lined cellars and storerooms, and the produce held its firmness markedly longer than the same fruit kept in plain clay. In the dairies of early 20th century America, before stainless steel took over the milk house, milk was set in copper pans, and it routinely stayed sweet 2 to 3 times longer than the same milk left in tinned steel. Nobody in those rooms owned a microscope. They owned account books, and the books said the same thing every season. Copper on the liquid, and the souring held off. Read that number again, because it is the one the title rests on. 2 to 3 times longer. The genuine, recorded multiplier came from copper that the milk actually touched. Not a charm in the air, a surface against the food. This is sanitation 100 generations deep, and it ends with us. But water and milk are the easy case. They pour across the metal. They touch all of it. Most of what actually dies in your kitchen is solid food, sitting in still, damp air, never quite touching anything. By rights, copper's reach should stop at its own surface, except it doesn't. And that is the third defense, and the strangest of the 3. The reveal. The spreadsheet. The answer is not a conspiracy. It is a spreadsheet. There was no decision to make you waste food. There was a decision to make a refrigerator $3 cheaper to build, repeated across every line on a bill of materials, and the copper happened to be sitting on one of those lines. What looks from your kitchen like a loss was from a boardroom a rounding error nobody thought twice about. That is the unglamorous truth underneath most disappeared knowledge. It rarely gets buried on purpose. It gets outcompeted by something with a better margin. Through the 1990s, copper was the standard metal in refrigeration. It conducts heat roughly 70% better than aluminum and stands up to corrosion. Then 2 pressures arrived at the same moment. Between about 2003 and 2011, the price of copper climbed more than 5-fold, cresting in February 2011 above $10,000 a metric ton. At the time, the highest price in its history. And in those same years, manufacturers were quietly losing a war against formicary corrosion, or ants' nest corrosion, in which organic acids, off-gassing from the adhesives, paints, and cleaning products trapped inside a tightly sealed modern home, eat microscopic tunnels through copper tubing until it leaks. Aluminum cost a fraction as much and was immune to it. The switch was not sinister, it was arithmetic. And underneath the arithmetic lies the rule that explains the entire disappearance. You cannot patent copper. It is element 29 on the periodic table. No company can own it, trademark it, or sell you a subscription to it. A material that nobody can own has no marketing budget, no sales team, and no champion in any boardroom on Earth. Now, set that against what copper had been doing for free. The thing it quietly accomplished, slowing the decay of food, could instead be packaged and sold back to you in 30-day increments. The little ethylene-absorbing sachets at the checkout, a few dollars each, designed to expire and be bought again. One of those is a single piece of metal you buy once in a lifetime. The other is a recurring revenue stream. A market does not weigh those two on the merits of preservation. It weighs them on the merits of repeat sales. And on that measure, the disposable packet wins every single time. Walk the math out loud because it is the whole story. A $4 copper scrubber bought one time against a $5 sachet replaced every month, $60 a year, every year, for as long as you own a refrigerator. Multiply that by a few 100 million kitchens. There is no product manager on Earth who looks at those two columns and chooses the one you only buy once. The incentive does not point at the better preservation method. It points at the one with a refill. The same logic shaped the box itself. Christian Steenstrup's 1927 monitor top was sold for a price families spread across their monthly electric bill, an appliance meant to be bought once and kept for a lifetime, and many of them still are. The refrigerator in your kitchen was designed around the opposite assumption. 11 to 14 years, then the sealed system that cannot be economically repaired gives out, and the whole unit is hauled away to be replaced. The machine that lasts a century and the machine that lasts a decade are not two stages of progress. They are two different answers to one question. Is the customer someone you sell to once or someone you sell to again and again? Say it without flinching because it is not a story about villains in a back room. The better business model beat the older, cheaper, ownerless solution. That is the whole mechanism. No secret meeting required. And if you doubt the chemistry was ever real, look at where it is still profited from. The global cut flower industry, worth tens of billions of dollars a year, spends serious money on copper-based agents to keep roses from wilting on the trip from greenhouse to vase. Copper preservation has a price tag wherever it can be turned into a product. What has no price tag, and therefore no salesman, is the version you can build yourself for the cost of a sandwich. The protocol. How to reclaim it. So here is how to take it back, done honestly, the way the chemistry actually rewards. First, get pure copper, not lacquered decorative copper whose coating seals the metal away from the air. Not copper-plated steel pretending to be the real thing. Bare, food-safe Type L copper tubing costs about $15 to $20 at any hardware store. A 3-pack of 100% copper mesh scrubbers runs around $4. Test any scrubber with a refrigerator magnet first. True copper is not magnetic, so if the magnet grabs it, it is plated steel and useless for this. Second, favor contact over air, because contact is where every documented gain came from. The strongest version is not a wire dangling in the cold. It is a clean copper sheet or tray laid flat across the bottom of the crisper drawer, so the fruit and vegetables rest directly on the metal. Wash it first in warm water and vinegar to strip the factory oils, then rinse it well. Third, respect the one rule that is not optional. Never put acidic food in direct contact with copper. No tomatoes, no citrus, no vinegar-dressed leftovers on the surface. Acid pulls copper out of the metal and into the food at levels your body should not be asked to absorb. Copper belongs under the lettuce, the berries, the herbs, never under the lemons. Fourth, let it tarnish and leave it alone. The dulling to brown and green is the metal working, not failing. Only if it builds a thick, crusted green coat should you soak it 5 minutes in equal parts white vinegar and water, rinse, and put it back. And the single highest value move is not in the refrigerator at all. It is on the surfaces your hands strike 100 times a day, where the EPA's own data stands on the firmest ground. Trade a plastic light switch plate or a stainless bathroom handle for solid, unlacquered brass or bronze, both of which are mostly copper. Unlike the experiment in your crisper drawer, that is a permanent, self-sanitizing fixture working every hour of every day with nothing to rebuy. The honest limit. Now the gap, because every honest system has one. A loop of copper floating in cold air is the weakest form of this effect. Contact does the work, and even then the gains are real but modest, and they vary, with the food, with the humidity, with how clean the metal stays. Copper does not stop ripening. That runs on ethylene gas, and despite a stubborn corner of the internet, a bare copper wire does not absorb it. Copper does not excuse careless storage, and most household food waste is still simply food that was bought and forgotten, not food the box killed. What copper does is close one specific gap: microbial decay where surface meets moisture. And it closes it for a few dollars, once, which is exactly the kind of unglamorous, unrepeatable advantage that a market running on repeat sales has no reason on earth to sell you. Closing. The handoff. The monitor top still running in that garage was assembled by people who trusted a material more than a marketing cycle. The same material is sitting on a hardware store shelf tonight for the price of a cup of coffee. So treat this the way the people in your own family line treated it, not as a claim to believe, but as a thing to test. Lay the copper under your produce, watch one crisper drawer for 2 weeks, and come back to the comments with exactly what happened. Which fruit held, which didn't. How many days you gained. Every honest result posted below becomes one more line in a record that no company is keeping for you. A field log written by the people actually using it, tested in real kitchens, and handed forward, the way this knowledge always moved before it stopped. The scroll reaches you. What you write next is the line that gets passed on.